to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
It is September, which means the crispy fall leaves are starting to come. We don't have as hot of days happening within our organizations and within our environments that we live and work in. We may still have some hotness inside of our organization. However, the fall definitely brings this energy with it, which is like, all right, we are getting back to school, which we talked about last month. And the month before, we talked about how do we diagnose, some specific issues or problems, and how do we celebrate those key wins with people data inside of our organization. So this month, we really are going to spend some time chatting about how we specifically look at talent pathways in our organization. So, in July, we had talked about people data and what do we do with people data? How do we use people data? And how do we determine what's going well or not going well, right? One of those key ways we can do that is with what our turnover data is. And for many of the clients that we talk to and many of the executives that we work with, one of the key issues right now is succession planning. It is, hey, we've got our top leaders that want to retire and we don't have anyone to backfill those roles. We've set some things in place to do this in the past, but yet, those individuals have not really stepped into the key roles that we anticipated them to do. So we're hiring from the outside, which means we are losing so much of the company culture that we're creating. And one of those questions that we often ask and that we often see is what specifically is that culture, and your staff even believe in the culture that you have and what you are doing, right? So, by the way, my name is Tracy Shirk, and I'm the Chief Talent Officer here at Elevated Talent Consulting. So thanks for diving right in with me as we head into September, as we head into, finishing out this quarter and the fourth quarter of 2022 and really ending this year better than we started it. Not just from a financial standpoint for our business with those business outcomes, but also for our people, that we've executed on those key strategies for our staff to ensure that they are fulfilled in those roles. Because quite honestly, for us, that is why we are here. And I think that that's why you're also listening as well. So there was a fun little stat, not really fun, but a fun little stat from a recent Gallup study that found that 27% of employees believe their company value. Really? 27% believe in the company values that are inside of the organization. That's a bit scary, right? So here's the deal. When we are attracting staff to our organization, we're so focused on something we call an employee value proposition and what that looks like. And so we talk so much about this in the first 4 weeks of our Hire program. And our Hire program will be starting on September 19th. So just so you know, if you're listening to this going, oh my gosh, I want more, we have that for you. Okay. So, but what is your company values and how are those lived within your organization, right? So Gallup defines culture as how things are done around here. That simple. How things are done around here is our culture, right? We often say here at Elevated Talent Consulting that the culture is the behaviors that you allow or don't allow to happen within your organization. Because if you're allowing those behaviors, that's something that you're saying is okay. And so here's something that's really important when we look at that is where are those gaps? If there's a huge gap between believing in the values, and if individuals don't believe in the values and why they're here and what they're doing inside your organization, they're not going to stay over the long term. That brings us back to succession planning, right? When you're looking to succession plan inside your organization and create talent pathways to move individuals into different roles, guess what? If we don't first believe in our values and are grounded in what that is, we're missing so much of what's important and what makes work and life fulfilling. So here's what we really find that is so important when we're creating, both talent development plans and talent pathway plans. And I'm going to define those two things in a minute, because talent development plans and talent pathway planning, which leads into succession planning, are two completely different things, but they're so intertwined because they support each other significantly. And so, number one is we want to tie the culture that you're creating to identify the organization. We want to live the core values in a way that everyone knows what they are and can spot them in their behaviors. So here's some key ways that Gallup specifically defined that. They said, hey, it must be clearly defined, communicated, and managed as an extension of purpose and brand. So our core values must be clearly defined. Do you know what your core values are inside of your organization, right? So at Elevated Talent Consulting, ours are to be your word, to be an example, to be fun. So those are some examples of what our core values are. And the fourth for us is to be a learner. So we have core 4 values that we live in everything that we do. And we start all of our team meetings with what is the core value that you lived out, this month, and also looking at that and saying, hey, how can you identify what another team member was doing with their core value? And why is that important? Because we're making it visible, right? We're making it visible and we are intentionally managing it. And that is something that Gallup also stated is really important, is that these core values, as tied into how we create the succession and the talent pathways in our organization, must be quantified and intentionally managed. So with that being said, I do want to kind of point out a distinction between talent development plan and talent pathway plan. I will name that we did do an episode on talent pathway planning about a year ago, and it's episode number 22. So we will have that episode linked in the show notes for you. But episode 22, is one where we specifically talk about talent pathway planning, what that looks like. So I don't want to rehash that here again, but we will kind of, weave these two things together. So a talent development plan is something where we're specifically working with an individual to develop who they are, right? And so here's some key, kind of steps to that. One is alignment of the business strategy to the business results and to those values. So within our people plan is the talent development plan. It is also the talent pathway strategy, along with how we hire and bring individuals into our organization, how we inspire them to perform, etc. The second is we need to identify gaps in what the job is and who the person is in the job, right? So when we are developing people, we may bring them into a job early on that they are not 100% aligned to and for, yet it is a part of the talent pathway plan in order to move them into a higher level role, but they must learn all the components of that higher level role first, right? So talent development, where's the fit in the gap between where an individual is and where they need to be to perform this position at a high level. Talent pathway plan is what is all the education, training, learning specifically about the business and about how we work in our systems in order to elevate you through the different levels of the organization, right? By the way, we use something called predictive index, and this makes this really easy. We can really easily see some fits and gaps between what the job needs and who the person is. It's not the skill set, it's the behavioral traits that essentially state this person will do the job over a long period of time. The third thing is to measure the effectiveness of those in their roles and the program as a whole, right? So, hey, how effective is an individual being in their role? And if there is, a gap between who they are and what the role needs, meaning what their needs are and what the job needs, then let's look and see where they might be a great fit. And that will allow us to elevate them into and through the organization. The other thing is we also want to measure the effectiveness of our training programs. So often we don't do this, right? And so when we can measure the effectiveness of our training programs and our talent pathway programs, our talent development programs, we can see if they're actually working versus us like throwing spaghetti at the wall. I don't know about you, but that's not my favorite thing to do. So, what we know is that 96% of organizations want to track this and only 50% of them do. And that came from a verb study. So with that being said, how are we measuring it? And number one is to look at the outcomes and the learning. So, hey, one key way that we typically will look at this is based on retention in the role and promotion into other roles. That's one way. Another way is, what is the productivity of this individual? Were they able to hit their deadlines with really strong key goals? And we did talk a lot about goals and goal setting last month when we talked about, the back to school mindset and goal setting and setting a syllabus for yourself, right? So that is something within the talent pathway plan and the talent development plan that's incredibly important is what is the goal and the goal setting that you have inside of your organization. Number 4 is ensuring that your executive team has buy-in into the program so that they are championing it throughout the organization. There's nothing worse than having, senior leaders not understand what's happening and kind of undermine it, right? And then number 5 is to diversify the components in building coaching and collaboration. So when we are developing talent development programs, we want to ensure that those individuals have the support that they need to be successful. So I'm going to do a quick recap, okay? So 5 key parts of a talent development plan include alignment of the plan with what the organization is doing, and we build this into the people strategy. 2 is identifying the gaps in what the job is and how this person is doing in it, what their natural behavioral strengths are, and what their skill sets are. What is the gap in that skill set? Number 3 is measuring the effectiveness of those in the role. So, hey, how effective is this program in moving them forward to meet their personal and the organization's professional goals? Number 4 is ensuring that they have the buy-in from their leadership team and that there's buy-in to support them to be successful and they're not being pulled like an octopus in 8 different directions and not able to focus a bit on their own professional development. And number 5 is, ensuring that they have the support that they need to really be successful within that. So that's the talent development plan. And those are typically individual to develop individual employees. Then we have our talent pathway plan, right? And this is essentially laying out, hey, how do staff grow and work through the organization? So one of the things that we find when we work with our clients is that they are much smaller organizations and there's not as defined plans as there are in large organizations. So I'm going to give you an example from a school system with teachers so that you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. Again, if you go back to episode 22, there's a lot more information here. However, this will kind of give you an idea and we'll talk about how you can kind of lay out those plans. So we want to have pathways. So for example, a classroom teacher can go on a teaching track where they can go further and further into their teaching. They can go into a leadership track where they're then leading people, or they can go into a senior specialist track where they're very specifically focused on specialized in a specific area. So this could be things like coaching, being a math coach, coaching teachers on how to teach math, right? That's a specialist. Leadership would be like your administration. And then teaching tracks would be, hey, continue to be a classroom teacher, but do the in-role growth, right? So I want to give that example. I know we have several, school districts that listen in, and sometimes I hear, you don't give me examples that help me in my organization, right? So I wanted to make sure that we threw that out. But with that, when we look at, let's say, a manufacturing environment, so what are the talent pathways that are laid out for someone that, let's say, comes in as a production worker, right? So it could be that, hey, they stay on that production line, but they move from position to position to position. And the next level up is something called a floater position, where they're kind of that jack of all trades that can go between any position on that line, right? Another one would be a specialist in an area. So for example, in production, so often we have things like our mechanics, our engineers, our CNC. So we can have a very specialized area that we can bounce them over to with the education to move them forward. And I do want to talk about this for a second. So I was having a conversation with a client last week specifically on this. And we were looking at the behavioral traits of the individual versus what the job needed in predictive index. And I said, hey, this individual is actually perfectly aligned for it. Could they be a good fit there? And what the client stated to me was, well, he's 60 years old. So I think if he was younger, absolutely. Now, I don't know about you, but you may or may not think that 60 is old, but I all of a sudden had my compliance HR hat fly on my head that said, that's age discrimination. So let's continue to have the conversation. Hey, do you think that this is still a conversation that could motivate him? And are there small things to do that could actually have him be more beneficial to the organization and have him be fulfilled in his role? The answer was possibly. Let's explore that once we get through our current priorities, right? So with that, I just say that story because there's times where we shut something down before we've gone to the person and asked the question. And it's really important to not make decisions for other people, but to ask the question of them and to let them make their own decisions, because so often their answers may surprise us and they may be more willing than what we think that they are. And this is an example of beliefs. We talked about beliefs last month when we talked about the back to school mindset. But what is the mindset we have about our people? Do we believe that our people are not, willing to step up and to grow? Or do we believe that they are? Because guess what? We create the space for our staff to step into those beliefs, along with them having accountability of creating it for themselves. But when both are aligned to grow, it grows much faster. So I just want to plant that little seed there for you. So back to our, talent pathways and career pathway planning is in manufacturing, we have, kind of that line level of production. We have the very specialized positions, and we can have those people management positions as well, right? We do need managers. We do need supervisors to kind of move some things forward. So that is kind of, one of those cliff notes that we wanted to go through specifically with that. I do want to give you some kind of checklist items to think about when you think about that talent pathway planning, right? So number one is you can assign coaches to spot talent in your line staff. Encourage those line staff to take on assignments, build relationships, and attend relevant courses, right? Sometimes it is skill set knowledge. Sometimes it's they need the coaching and they need to know that someone else believes in them enough to champion them to move forward and to step into that. You want to support your line staff through their talent pathway with regular coaching sessions. So if you don't know how to coach, or if your leadership team doesn't know how to coach, it's a very, very specific skill set. That is one of those things that not everyone can coach and not everyone is supposed to coach, right? But it's one of those things that it can make a significant impact, not only on developing people as a whole, but then moving them through, the talent pathways and, really creating those succession plans inside your organization. Then you want to learn what works and review, hey, this didn't work. So guess what? We are learners, right? That's one of our core values at ETC. So we are learners. So if it doesn't work, how do we go back and reconfigure it to move it forward? And then we want to celebrate our successes across the entire organization. So as we're developing our talent pathways, again, we're moving people through the organization in a way that elevates them to fill the key positions that's in leadership, people management roles, that is specifically in specialized roles, and that is also in our frontline roles. So with that, we always land the plane here on, what is a key takeaway for executives listening in. And first, I want you to understand what your leadership team needs and then really measure those outcomes and really ask yourself, a key question. Do you have a plan for your leadership team and their replacements when they retire? And do you have a plan to replace your best line staff? And if you don't, that is all the reason to go on a journey of talent pathway planning and really those personalized talent development plans. And for human resources is, again, understanding very, very clearly what your executive needs and understanding the business strategy and those business results so you can help align those through the people strategy, which includes talent development plans, and it also includes talent pathway planning. So with that, thank you so much for joining us and listening in. We, of course, have our Hire program starting on September 19th. So if you are interested in joining us in this launch of the Hire program, we will go through what is an employee value proposition, mission, vision, values, et cetera, within that. And we would love to have you join us if this is something that is of interest. With that being said, have an amazing week, and we will join you again next week. Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.